All right, welcome back everybody to Logic and Language, Philosophy 180. I want to talk just a little bit about section 1.4. So we have some more vocabulary here, really important vocabulary. Again, nothing terribly tough, but we're starting to get a little bit more complex. And it's a little easier to start losing track of this vocabulary, and it's just as important that that you keep it straight. So the ideas that I just want to define and make sure you understand in relation to each other in this video are truth, validity, and the opposite of validity, which is invalidity, soundness, strength, the opposite of strength, which is weakness, and cogency. Now, the first thing you need to do to understand these different terms is to sort of break them up. Truth is something that we attribute to statements. Remember, the building blocks of argument are statements, and statements are sentences that can be true or false, that have truth value. So truth is something that we can say about a statement. It's something we can say about a premise or a conclusion. So truth is an attribute of statements. Which means it can be a part of any, truth can be applied to the parts of any argument, any kind of argument. Validity and soundness and invalidity are ideas that we can attribute to deductive arguments. So when we're talking about when something is valid, when an argument is valid or not, when we're talking about an argument is sound or not, we're only talking about deductive arguments. The concepts only apply to deduction. Likewise, when we're talking about strength and weakness or cogency, you guys should already know where I'm going with this. We're talking about arguments that aren't deductive. The other kind of argument, if we were in a normal class right now, I'd make somebody say it out loud. We're talking about induction, right? So, I'm going to define all these terms, but you have to keep this straight in your head. When we're talking about truth, we're talking about something that can be attributed to statements. And the opposite of truth is falseness, right? Truth or falseness applies to statements. Validity or invalidity, soundness applies to deduction. Strength, weakness, cogency applies to induction. So, validity. Validity describes a deductive argument where if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. That is, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. Now, if you go back to the previous video, you'll see that that's how I define deduction. And so I was telling you the truth, but I was kind of doing it in shorthand. When you say that in a deductive argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true, what you're actually talking about is a valid deductive argument. So validity, more precisely, we can get more precise now as we move forward. Validity is a quality of a deductive argument that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. If you have something that's in a deductive form, but it's possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false, what you have then is an invalid deductive argument. So let's do this again. In deduction, and the whole idea of deduction is it's this formal structure where if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. Go back to the last lecture, that's what we talked all about. But really, when you talk about deduction in that way, you're talking about valid deductions. A deduction that's well-formed, that's put together properly. In a valid deduction, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. But sometimes people put things together that are supposed to be deductive. And yet, they're not structured properly. They're not put together in a way that sort of lives up to the promise of deduction. And in those cases, we're going to say they're invalid. If ever in a deductive argument, or an argument that purports to be deductive. You can have true premises and a false conclusion. If you can think of one instance in which that is your situation, then what you have is an invalid argument. Now, soundness also only applies to deduction, and soundness describes validity. Oops, sorry. Validity plus truth. And remember what truth applies to in this context. True premises. Right? Validity or soundness means validity plus true premises. And because validity means if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true, that's also going to mean that you have a true conclusion, but you don't need to worry about that. In fact, you can just, with shorthand, you can say that soundness equals validity and truth. You don't have to have true premises to have a valid argument. This is a little bit tricky. What you need to have for a valid argument is a structure in which, if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. And there are all kinds of crazy syllogisms that you can put together that are perfectly valid, but have nothing to do with truth. Right? All garbage cans are elephants. All elephants are polka dotted. Therefore, all garbage cans are polka dotted. That is a perfectly valid form. It has nothing to do with the truth of the premises. So as a deductive argument, it's valid, but it's not sound. Why is it not sound? Because it doesn't have true premises. But the fact that it doesn't have true premises in no way undermines its validity. Validity is about the structure of the argument. Soundness puts that structure together with the truth of its premises. Okay. In induction, we don't talk about validity and invalidity. We just talk about strength and weakness, right? So, in an inductive argument, for there to be strength, what you have is that it's improbable for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. That's all you can go for in induction. You can't go for certainty in induction, remember. That's off the table. Like the weatherman who says there's a 100% chance of rain. Certainty's off the table. But that's a very strong argument because 100% of the time those conditions were in place, it rained, right? So it's very strong. If the premises are true, if his data is correct, his meteorological survey has come up with the right stuff, if his instruments are working the way they're supposed to go, supposed to work, then that's a strong argument. If his premises are true, it is probable that his conclusion is true. So you can already tell what weakness is. In a weak argument, the truth of the premises does not suggest the probability of the conclusion. The premises are true, but the conclusion is not necessarily probable. That's a weak inductive argument. Now, if you've been paying attention in processing, you probably already know what cogency is, because strength for an inductive argument is like validity. Weakness for an inductive argument is like invalidity for a deductive argument. Cogency for an inductive argument is a lot like soundness. So cogency in induction equals strength plus truth. Strength plus truth. So if you have a cogent inductive argument, you have an argument that's strong. That is, if the premises are true, the conclusion is probable, and the premises are true. So this is it for these statements. Go back to the book, take a look, watch this video again, think this through. But I tell you, the very first thing I said at the beginning of this video is probably the very most important thing. Remember that truth is something that you attribute to statements, that validity, invalidity, and soundness is something that you attribute to deductive argument. And remember that strength, weakness, and cogency are concepts that you attribute to inductive argument, and most of the rest of this stuff will completely fall into place. Good luck.